Hello, I'm Steven Michaelis. I am from the Netherlands. I am Dutch, and the story of SAS really starts a long time ago. In August 1966, that is 56 years ago now, I had my 15th birthday, and on my 15th birthday I got a stereo reel-to-reel tape recorder, a Philips, of course, being in the Netherlands, and that was quite unique actually, because stereo was very new in those days, and this was the very first stereo reel-to-reel tape recorder that Philips was making. And I was very excited. I was 15 years old, and not only did I want to play music on my tape recorder, I actually wanted to record music. And fortunately, I was involved in a group of young people that had organized a beat club, as it was called in those days. On Sunday afternoon, in a local community center, we would have live bands on stage, and we would entertain maybe some 200 young people. The community center was very happy to do this because it was getting young people off the street. And I was very happy because at the back I had my reel-to-reel tape recorder, and I was recording these bands, these groups, with 3 or 4 microphones and a little homemade mixing desk. I don't dare to say. It had 4 knobs on it, and that was it. Most of these bands were well-known Dutch bands in those days, but we also had some foreign bands. I remember we had The Marmalade, which was at the time a well-known English band, and then we had another band called Pink Floyd. I had never heard of them, but I recorded them, and this was a very early Pink Floyd with Syd Barrett in it. And I still have these recordings, but I'm not allowed to duplicate them. I have received letters from their lawyers to warn me that I should keep these recordings very safe and not distribute them. So I very early on, at the age of 15, got involved in recording live music and getting involved in a little bit of mixing and microphones and cables. And of course I never knew at that time where that would lead to in the long run. Go forward a few years on, and I was involved in recordings in recording studios with proper mixing desks, and I was touring with bands in the Netherlands, into Germany, and I learned a lot more about sound recording, sound processing. Together with my brother, I set up a company at the young age of, well, actually I was 17, I think, at the time, and we started to import loudspeakers from England. And these were big loudspeakers for bands and sometimes for discotheques, but most of them actually in those days were for live bands. And through that I got in contact with a company in London that made very big loudspeakers and horn high frequency speakers. And forward a bit further, at the age of 24, nearly 25, I was in contact with this English company, and they said, "Do you want to work for us in England?" And I said, well, I have my business with my brother, but my brother was actually quite keen to do things on his own, not have his little kid brother bothering him. So I took the decision to take the job, and I moved at the age of 25 to England and started working for a loudspeaker manufacturer. There I learned an awful lot, because until that time I was an amateur. I wasn't really professional in the field, but they trained me. They had an unechoic chamber. They made frequency charts of microphones, of loudspeakers, and they trained me in acoustic engineering. And so nowadays I would say that I'm an acoustic engineer rather than a recording or a sound engineer. After a few years in England, this company was asked to design a sound system for Wembley Stadium. This is of course the most famous football stadium in England, in North London, and they needed a sound system not to have very high quality sound in the stadium, but as an emergency notification system. If there was an emergency, then they wanted to make notifications. They wanted to talk to the audience and say, stay in your seats, or slowly, carefully leave the stadium. And that is not easy in a football stadium. There's a lot of echo, the acoustics are very poor, and what we had to do is not to reproduce the sound of the speaker very accurately, but actually to modify the speech in such a way that people would get the message. And so this was my first forays into sound modification, and we would take out all the low frequencies and strengthen some mid frequencies, take out the high frequencies, and of course at this stage I was very interested in it. I learned a lot, and I still didn't know that this would end up with SAS many years later. So the sound system I designed for Wembley Stadium, I'm very proud of that, except that of course since that time they have demolished the stadium and built a brand new stadium, so my sound system has also gone. But it was something that I learned a lot from, and that I'm proud of course. Then when I was in my early 30s, I joined JVC, a Japanese consumer electronics company, and not as an engineer at all. Actually, I was initially in planning and then later on in marketing, and I did the marketing for the UK and for Ireland. But of course it was a technical company, and I traveled to Japan, to the United States, and I had a lot of contact with the research centers of JVC. And JVC was of course developing VHS video recorders, but they were also deeply involved in MP3, sound compression, and nowadays of course many people use MP3 for their compressed sound files. And I was there at the very early stages of when they were experimenting of how much they could compress. So I have been all my life into technical development, and I've been very fortunate that has been involved in not only in the UK, but it has been in Japan, in the United States, and I've met some really important people that have made great advances in the field of acoustic and in sound engineering. And all of that experience, built up inside me, and it was only in my, how old was I? In my mid-50s, that I came across a therapy method that said, they claimed that with the use of sound through headphones, they could influence how autistic children behaved. Now, at that time, I thought, I know everything about sound. I'm an expert in this field, and I was not really convinced about this at all. I was very skeptical about it. But I was in contact with this company, and I was often there, and I saw that there actually were remarkable results. And these children just put headphones on, they were listening to music, and within a relatively short space of time, of just a few weeks, there at times were substantial changes in their behavior. And that, of course, fascinated me. I said, kind of, cool. After all, I don't know everything. I thought I knew everything, but I don't. So that started me on a quest to research of what could it be? What were these children listening to? What was the magical ingredient that made these changes that were so life-changing for these children and, of course, for the parents? The company that I was involved with actually didn't quite know how it worked. They said, we know it does work, and we are applying it with great care and with great love and attention. They worked with these children, but they said, yeah, we don't know ourselves quite what the magic ingredient is. Now, being an engineer, of course, first of all, I got a screwdriver, and I unscrewed the box that they were using. That didn't really help me. There were a lot of electronics inside, but it didn't really tell me what it was doing. But being a sound engineer, of course, I put headphones on and I was listening to the sounds. And that gave me quite a few clues. I said, it is doing this, it's doing that. I had a lot of experience, obviously, with sound and with acoustics. And of course, by that time, the internet was up and running, and so I started to research on the internet and say, so what is it that could be an ingredient that helps people change, and what can be done? And so I found out what they were doing, but then at the same time I found out that the method was quite old, had been developed in the 70s, and a lot more research had been done since that time into how the brain works, not just with autistic children, and also sound engineering has changed. In the beginning, I worked with mixing desks that were still running on valves that even didn't have transistors in them. Nowadays, of course, it's a wonderful field because with computer technology, it is so much easier to do sound engineering on a computer. So not only did I find out what the magic ingredient was for the system that they were using, but I was inspired to find out new ways. And I've been researching for the last 20 years of how does the brain work, what do we need as input into the brain to learn, to develop, what can be the blocks that can be in the brain, and how can we use sound through headphones to influence the brain to process information better and to overcome some of those stumbling blocks. So this started a journey of research for me to find out what is it that the brain needs to learn and to develop, and how can we influence the brain using sound through headphones, which would be my preferred option, obviously, because I'm a sound engineer. How we process sensory information is a key element of how we learn and how we develop. Young babies, the moment they are born, they soak up information through their 5 senses, and with that they learn language very rapidly, not speech, but they start to understand words very early on in the first year, and they learn the sound of language. Japanese children will attune themselves to Japanese sounds, and English children will attune themselves to English sounds. And the brain does that actually in the first year of life already. It's a fascinating field of investigation, first of all, of how does the brain learn, how does the brain understand, put things into memory, how do we recall information, and eventually this was also spreading to areas of behavior, social skills and emotional well-being. And I still do this every day. I research together with a small team of people now that help me out, and we develop methods, ways of influencing the brain to work better. It's interesting, of course, that for the last 200 or 300 years, families have been sending their children to school. And schools are the areas that is the institution that educates children. And most people don't think any further than that. They say, well, send your child to school and the teacher will do the job. And of course they teach very specific things. They teach reading and writing and then mathematics and history and things like that. What I'm interested in is how can we help the brain to learn better? How can we prepare the brain for learning? So I'm not really interested in the contents of the learning. With our method we don't teach history or geography, but we do prepare the brain to take in information easier, to understand it better, to put it into long-term memory, to recall it easier. And these are fundamentals to learn better, to perform better, not only for children, but also, of course, for teenagers when they go to high school or for university students. And we have many adults now that want to perform better in their work or want to feel happier in their home life with their families. And so this field has expanded, where it started off with what can I do for autistic children? This is the beginning point that where we started off with, and it has now expanded to the whole range from children of 3 years old, and we are also working with the elderly in their 80s that have the onsets of dementia or Alzheimer's disease. We are not magical workers. We can't make everything go away, but we do have methods, ways to smooth the way, to make people function a bit better. And sometimes we are very successful and we make people function a lot better, and especially happier and more confident. To make a long story short, we have developed a method to help children, teenagers, adults, the elderly to perform better in life, to be happier in life. And the method is complex, but the application for the client is very simple, and the application also for practitioners that are working with our method is very simple. And this is really important, that it is practical and it can be used with children and adults with all kinds of conditions. We are very fortunate that the method works even during sleep. So we have autistic children that do not like to have headphones on their ears, and they listen to the programs while they are asleep in bed, and it works. We are using the method in hospitals where people are in an induced coma, and the nurses will put the headphones on and will start the programs, and these patients in hospital will regulate their breathing. They will be much more even in their breathing, and therefore they heal faster. So the applications are very wide and very simple to apply.